Welcome to The State of Us. Real people with honest opinions and the future of responsible media. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
That's me, your host. Global growth is slowing. Was this Trump's goal all along? Well, we'll find out. But before we do, it'll be important to get a little backstory on what exactly is happening here. As some of you may know, Mr. Trump and the president of China agreed during the G20 meeting in Buenos Aires to pause the trade war between the world's two largest economies for 90 days and work to resolve several areas of tension, including the trade gap between what America imports and China and what China buys from the United States. That's reported by the New York Times December 3rd. So we'll look at all of this and why you care. Here's why you care. Before we introduce the very special someone who's with us, I'll just give you this little tidbit because this will keep you hungry, hopefully. 2/3 of the working age people in the United States were employed as of October, meaning 1/3 of working age people didn't have a job. And you'll say, what? The unemployment rate's so low. Well, keep listening.
Your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, here we go. Talk about the economy and Trump, huh? And why we care?
Feels like a theme.
Okay. I like talking about the economy.
Yeah? Not the other one?
No, I mean, we'll see. I mean, I made my comments about China. Anything China agrees to, we need to be very leery of that because they will do what's best for them. So I can see where, and Trump's motivation, I think President Trump's motivation is keeping the stock market going upward and keeping the economy strong. I think so you have those two that are pitted against one another. Trump wanting to do things that keeps the economy growing and the Chinese only agreeing to things that will help them. So we'll see if they can find any common ground because I think those are the driving forces in each of their minds.
So Lance, before we keep people on the edge of their seats here too much longer, if 3.7% is the unemployment rate, which is its lowest level since 1969, then how is it possible that less than 2/3 of the working age population was employed? In other words, over 1/3 is unemployed. How's that possible? Because
they're not looking for work.
Oh, so you mean that if I've given up, I'm not counted as unemployed?
No.
Oh,
I mean, don't you have to look for so long? I forget what the statistic is, but the economists have a formula that they use. And once you have quit looking for a job for so long, then you are no longer counted among the missing. But yes, I mean, again, why would I go out and work for a job when it's not going to pay the bills? Because we have talked about this before. And the fact is that wages have not gone up as companies have made more money. And historically, I say historically, that's not true. After World War II, till the 70s, 1970s, 80s, that was the formula. If the company made more money, employees made more money. That has not been the case since the economic crisis in the early 80s.
Well, we even talked about, I think just on the last episode, how up until the 20th century or late 19th century, most of the way that people lived and worked was based around this idea of I share in the profits of what I do. That's how I make money.
Right.
I buy something from somebody else, which then I turn into something that I sell to somebody else.
Right.
And that's how livelihoods are made.
And my success or failure is based on how hard I work and how much money I can make and how much profit I can make on selling that. And I get to determine the amount of profit. So therefore, in a sense, I mean, the desire for the product drives the price and what I have to pay for the raw materials. But then, hey, then I get ingenious and I produce my own raw materials or whatever. And I find but yes, I was paid for what I did.
So for the majority of our history, would it be safe to say that the thinking that when companies have more money, workers will thereby get more money is not the case? For the majority of our history, that's not been the case. I mean, I'm just talking years here, right?
You're stumping me. Yeah, I'm trying to think
right?
here.
I mean, you said the 20s to the 70s. Is that, or did I miss that?
Well, no, World War II. No, I'm saying there have been periodic times.
I mean, if we're saying
where that happens,
if we're saying 50 years, roughly,
so we're saying in the basis of the United States or history of mankind.
I mean, the basis of our country, the United States.
All right.
Because we hear that a lot, the, trickle down economic idea.
No, generally it has not been a country for the worker.
See, this is one of those things. I don't want to digress too far away from global growth is slowing, but I think it's kind of related to that. It is frustrating to me how often I hear people say, well, it didn't used to be this way. What does that mean? Because typically when they say that, the reality is that for most of history, whether we're talking the United States or on a global scale, it was that way. And it's only in the 20th century that we're talking about where there was a time where these people were alive where it wasn't that way.
Well, then that's the case. Remember, most of the World War II generation are dying.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about people whose past goes back to 1950. And the whole economic structure of the United States changed at the end of World War II. And the growth of unions and the idea of the factory job and working in one place for your entire life and loyalty and all of those things. Yeah, those were all well and good for people who worked in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. That has not been the case since then. But that's what most of those people that say what you say, that's when they joined the workforce or when they worked. And yes, things were like that at that time, but they really weren't like that before then. And they haven't been that way. I don't have,
the most recent.
You can say 87, I mean, early 80s, 87, there were a couple of different financial issues. And people also understand, we've talked about before, historically in capitalism, there are booms and busts. We've had multiple recessions and depressions in the United States in our history since we became a country in 1776. So everybody's like, oh my gosh, there's a recession. Oh my gosh, there's a depression. This is horrible. It's never happened before. Yes, it has. It's our economy is cyclical. And what we have now, we have a government who has realized it's not a good way to stay in power if you let things boom and bust too much. So we've tried to pass legislation to try to even things out over a longer period of time so people don't have to feel this boom and bust cycle of capitalism.
Oil prices are falling. Factory orders are diminishing, reflecting slacking demand for goods. Companies are warning of disappointing profits, sending stock markets into a frantic bout of selling that reinforces the slowdown. So one of these things that happens when you're talking about slowdowns or recessions is that a big portion of what goes wrong is self-inflicted. It's not actually the economy that's doing it as much as it is people get worried and nervous. And then there's big sell-offs or people quit spending the way they had before, even though they have the same money that they always had. Or, relative. They had a month ago, they have as much money as they do now, but all of a sudden it's like they pull back. Oh, better not spend as much. We're headed for a slowdown. All of that accelerates and amplifies the effects of these things. And I think a lot of people don't think about that's a big part of the problem we face, which is why, as Lance highlighted, the thinking has been the government's trying to do things that even these out. Doesn't mean that we don't have booms and busts. It just means they're trying to minimize the effects of them so it's a little smoother, so that people don't do what ultimately causes the worst to happen, which is mass sell-off of stocks. So that's part of the thinking there. The reason for this turn is from rising interest rates delivered by the Federal Reserve and other central banks to the unfolding trade war unleashed by the Trump administration. The likelihood that Britain's tortuous exit from the European Union will damage trade across the English Channel has discouraged investment. This is an article entitled Global Growth Cools Leaving Scars of '08 Unhealed in the New York Times December 1st edition. None of this, Lance, none of it amounts to a screaming emergency by any means, or even a pronounced drop really in commercial activity. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, a think tank run by the world's most advanced nations, recently concluded that the global economy would expand by 3.5% next year, down from 3.7% this year.
Mm-hmm.
So people are listening. Well, that's not that big of a drop. What do we even mean there? So the trade war going on, right, Lance? We've got this trade war going. And that's what I was talking about at the beginning of the show there, is that Mr. Xi and Mr. Trump agreed at the G20 90-day halt to the trade war to cool tensions.
Mm-hmm.
The specifics, we don't know other than that.
Well, China hasn't even announced that there is a ceasefire for 90 days. And I say ceasefire in, using that term to say that everybody's a cooling off period. So the article points out that President Trump has announced this. The Chinese government or their Office of Budget, none of them have said anything, that they're not due to speak until Thursday. So this is what the United States is saying is going on. China hasn't denied or agreed to it.
So
yet publicly.
So Trump's had a lot of these policies. He's affixed tariffs on some $250 billion in Chinese exports, which are temporarily on pause. But understanding something, this has produced little change in China's economic policies. In fact, it has actually increased the American trade deficit with China, contrary to what Mr. Trump's stated aim is. Something important here to note, though, because this is the New York Times, so everybody who's out there, if we have anybody left who actually, supports the president, who listens, I hope we do, but I'm not holding out hopes that we've got a lot of those people. If you're going to get on me and, the liberal Times, they would say something like that. Important to understand and note here, in a little defense of Trump, that he has actually said on a few occasions, and people interviewed have said, it would get worse before it would get better. Mm-hmm. So when I go into this next part of, is this what he wanted all along? This isn't like a trick. We got you, Trump, you dingle dong, you've sent us into this downturn. It's more of an acknowledgement, a serious question of, isn't this what he wanted all along? Because we know how trade wars go. They have to, it gets bad before it gets good. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean it's going to get good, but it means that's kind of the prerequisite. That's what happens in trade wars.
Right.
Things get worse. And then because they get worse, it puts pressure on somebody or multiple parties to negotiate a better deal because they don't like what's happening. It's thrown sand in the gears of China's industrial juggernaut. That's the effects that we've seen so far. Mm-hmm. As of September, China's rail freight usage, bank lending, and electronic consumption had increased about 9% compared with the previous year. And you'll say, okay, well, it increased. Well, the pace was 11% prior to this.
Right.
So we've seen a real live, it's having an effect in China, not just on us.
Right.
Now that doesn't mean that it's going to work, but it means they're being affected by it. Given that China is the world's second largest economy too, Lance, you have to keep in mind that the consequences of whatever happens in China ripple throughout the world, especially like there's been a drop in factory orders in Germany, which is a good indicator, of one of those ripples. Same thing. American farmers have suffered a lot of losses, which we've talked about before, as China's responded to tariffs by slapping duties on imports from the United States, not least on soybeans.
And that's where President Trump has announced, hey, farmers are going to do well because China's agreed to buy things. And that is what the president is saying this morning, Monday, as we go on the air. But again, China has not confirmed nor denied that. So again, the president's hoping that some of these things will help. And as well as the president at the G20 continued to argue with Canada over aluminum prices and steel prices, which are also, and you have to remember too, just last week, GM restructured and is closing plants in Ohio to make cars. But at the same time, the president is now announcing that the Chinese government is going to cut the tariff on American imported cars. Now, it is at 40% currently is what they tax U.S. cars being sold in China. The president says they're going to cut it, but he does not give us a number. And again, China has neither confirmed or denied that this is going to take place. So it's caused stock markets right now to go up and companies and investors to feel good, along with the lower oil prices and different things like that. But we shall see what the long-term effect is, which is what you're getting at by talking about this article. Long-term, things are slowing down. They're still improving, but they're, and people say, well, but you're kind of, doom and gloom. I mean, things are slowing down, but they're still improving. Things are still growing. Things are still better than they used to be. Okay. But like you said at the beginning of the show, it's the perception that causes people to do things to hurt the economy. If people hear that this factory, the Chevy Cruze factory is closing in Ohio and farmers didn't have as good a year as they had last year, all of a sudden they're not going to buy as much stuff this winter to prepare for next year. People aren't going to go out and buy that new car. People aren't going to spend as much at Christmas. And then that will overall cause the economy to slow down even more. So any kind of slowdown like this where people are affected, or your boss says, well, you know what? We're not making as much profit as we thought. So we're not going to give you that 2.5% or 3% raise that we gave you last year. That's not going to happen this year. So you're still going to make more money than you were 2 years ago. But in your mind, you're thinking, ooh, but I'm not making more money next year than I made this year. So I'm not doing as well. You know what I mean? It's that psychological, but it does affect on our spending habits. Mm-hmm. And then again, the government and the president's right. He has to encourage people to spend money. That's what makes this thing work, is that we have to go out there and spend money. So the president's doing his job in trying to convince people that everything's going to be okay and you should continue to spend your money, because that's what will make everything okay.
Right.
But if you go out there and spend your money and then all of a sudden it's not okay anymore, now you're in trouble.
So would you see then that the president's doing a good thing by encouraging people to keep spending money?
Well, that's the president's job, whether it's Donald Trump, Barack Obama, Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, it doesn't matter. That's a president's job, is to convince people that if the economy's bad, it's going to get better. If it's going well, it's going to continue to go well. And so
in that sense, he's doing the right thing.
Yes, right.
Okay. Keeping with presidential.
That's what they're supposed to do.
Presidential tradition, so to speak.
Right.
As not amplifying the frenzy by saying everything's bad, save all your money. Okay. So hawks inside the Trump administration seeking to inflict harm on China to impede its continued ascent as a global superpower might be exactly what they're after. If that's the mission, then Mr. Trump may be willing to absorb economic costs at the price of containment. This is where I want to finish the show with this, assuming that we have time to get to it. I got 2 questions we got to answer first, Lance, but
okay,
people have to stick around because the last thing we're going to get to, as long as we've got time, should China be contained? Don't say anything. Don't say anything.
Okay, I'm thinking, yeah.
Should we be trying to contain China? Okay, so that's what we're going to end with. But I'll give you this to chew on here a second while I tell people what we're trying to accomplish. Is Trump's trade war working? Important caveat, so far. Is Trump's trade war working so far? TrueChat's mission, and the State of Us is part of TrueChat. TrueChat's mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. We've got this nice, colorful banner here in the studio. Printed it just for Lance, so that we didn't want to give him just a regular piece of paper because that would minimize the importance of.
Then you'd hear me grabbing for a piece of paper all the time.
Yeah.
You do pick that up. Yes.
Yeah. We don't need him ruffling around for the paper. So we like to make him stretch his neck to look at it. And if you have ethical concerns, if you think we're not upholding the mission, info. There you go again. I've done that twice now in like a 2 or 3 month period. Ethics@truechat.org. Ethics@truechat.org. Send an email over. Let them know. They'll take a look, and we'll probably talk about it on air because we try to be pretty transparent with that stuff.
That's what happens when you have me do the reads for a while. You get rusty.
So before Lance gets into answering this, is Trump's trade war working so far? Go to Twitter @TrueChatORG. Let us know. Okay, Lance, ready? So everybody pause, go give us your thoughts, and then we're going to see how right you are. But you have to, it's the honor system here. You can't listen and then go comment. I mean, you can, but if you're going to play the game, you got to pause right now and go document it so that you can say, play the tape, go look at that tweet. You'll see when you're
not going to like my answer.
Okay. Well, I of course not.
Okay.
Well, what makes you think I'm not going to like it?
Because I'm going back to the way I used to answer questions.
Oh, great. Okay. All right.
See, I told you.
Go ahead.
Told you, go ahead. Ask the question. Lead me in there.
Yeah. Is it working so far?
Okay. What's your definition of working?
Based on, see, folks, I'm trying to keep it narrow here because otherwise you let it squirm away. It's tough to do. He's got his 30 years stacked here of squirreling. So
I really want to answer your question.
I know.
But I don't know what you mean by, is it working?
Is it working in the sense that Trump's goal was to put pressure on China to bring them to the table to negotiate a better deal? If we're assuming that that's the goal for the purpose of this conversation.
Okay. We haven't seen it yet.
Haven't seen what?
The Chinese come to the table. So has he forced them to the table yet? No.
Isn't this 90-day ceasefire? Doesn't that count for something?
Okay.
I mean, it's not.
But we're still not talking. And the Chinese government has neither confirmed or denied this report. This is all coming from President Trump. I'm sorry. He doesn't have a real long leash of trust and honesty with me. Just because he's saying this is going on. I mean, I'm still waiting for my middle-class tax cut that he promised me the first week of November so that I would vote for his Republican candidates in the upcoming House elections, which hasn't come to fruition yet. So just because the president has said this doesn't mean that it's going to happen. And even if it's a 90-day pullback, that doesn't mean that anything's going to get done. And I just don't see it as it hasn't worked yet. Is the possibility out there that this could work out the way he's planned it? Yes. If that's your definition of working, then yes, it's working. He hasn't totally upset the Chinese to the point where they've said, you know what, we're not going to talk and we're going to drive the world into an economic crisis. Is that a fair answer? I mean, I don't care whether it's what you're looking for or not. But I mean, have I answered your question?
I'm not looking for anything other than just an answer.
Well,
you're entitled to whatever.
But you're wanting me to say, yeah, look at all the good things he's doing. Nothing good has come out of this yet. Okay. There is nothing positive that has come out of this yet.
Right. I mean, so far all that's happened is we have a slowdown.
But there's nothing.
Which is bad.
Right. And we know that the farmers took a hit this summer.
Yes.
But the president covered them by getting the Republican Congress to pass some laws that gave some aid to the farmers this summer to reach through their hard points, We know that it's hurt the tariffs on steel and aluminum have helped those manufacturing sectors of the United States, but has hurt other factories in the United States because it's driven up prices. And so now they're struggling. So again, it's almost, if you really you're trying to pin me down here, it's a wash. Yes, it's helping those areas that he has designated. But as you say and point out in the article here, it's causing an overall slowdown in the growth of the economy.
As I read the article, as I understand it, just for some clarity for people out there who might have, because I got a little mixed up on it and I just want to make sure that we're clear. The way it's reported is that Mr. Trump and Mr. Xi agreed during the G20 meeting to pause the trade war. So in other words, they've both confirmed the pause in the trade war. What hasn't been confirmed is what Trump tweeted about, two separate things. One, and this is, I'm quoting here from Trump's Twitter, farmers will be a very big and fast beneficiary, big and fast are all caps, beneficiary of our trade deal with China. They intend to start purchasing agricultural product immediately. We make the finest and cleanest product in the world, and that is what China wants. Later, he also tweeted on Sunday night saying that China had agreed to reduce and remove tariffs on cars coming into China from the United States. The current tariff rate, 40%, which China reached in response to Mr. Trump's tariff, and it was not clear what level it would fall to, or that China actually agreed to that at all. So he made two statements about things they've ceded, which China has not confirmed, and in fairness, has not denied. The only thing that China has confirmed is there's a 90-day pause.
Right. That's my whole point. So his trade war has not worked.
Right. Well, I said working so far.
It has not worked so far.
Okay.
China has not conceded anything.
In my response to this, because I want to save time for that, the juicy one we had, which is should we be trying to do any of this at all? We get to that. I'll say that it's working in the sense that it's following the necessary steps that we typically see in these types of negotiations. And what I mean by that is Party A puts pressure on Party B in turn puts pressure on Party A, which in turn causes what's happened here, which is this, kind of this climax, this moment of we're pausing now. Everybody hold their breath. 90 days. So hopefully you don't suffocate and die in this time, but hold your breath here, because for 90 days, we're going to take some time and try to figure something out. So now we've gotten this step to we're prepared, not that we're prepared to talk about it. So we're following the steps. So it's working in the sense that we're not there. We haven't achieved what we're after, but it's moving in the right direction. Let me put it that way. We're moving in the right direction to see it, quote unquote, work as Trump has defined it. Because I think that's what we have to operate off of. Not, is it working in the sense that we want a trade war to work? No. I mean, if we're going to judge the president says the goal is X. Did he achieve that goal? That's what we're looking at. So no, he hasn't achieved it. We're just at the moment successfully following the steps that we have to follow to get there. So it could still all fall apart in horrendous fashion, and the slowdown could all be for naught because China turns their nose up and says, nope. Or Trump. I mean, in all fairness here, right? It could be him too.
Sure, because
that's not outside
the
realm.
They could come back with something and he says, no, that's not what I want. That's not good enough.
So then we just keep going.
Right.
And we have another 6 months, a year, and then the same thing happens again. Ceasefire, we try again, so on and so forth. And somebody eventually gives in. Us or them. I mean, that's how this.
Well, like the story says, the Chinese don't know who they're negotiating with.
Right.
Are we negotiating with the president? Where are we negotiating? Because the people you've sent over here are saying one thing, and then the president's going on Twitter and saying something different. And the Chinese are going, okay, now what's the real offer here?
Right. Well, and they've got some.
I mean, that's in the article.
Historical perspective. I mean, they have some. They can be offended pretty easily by different actions that maybe we wouldn't be as offended by.
Yes.
And that's not saying it's wrong, but that's an important China negotiating thing is they have there's a decorum and a way in which they expect things to be done.
Handled and be treated. Yes, very much so.
Okay. So we're going to skip the second to last one because I think it's kind of redundant. Is there reason for hope that it will go well? Yeah.
Well, they're still talking.
Yeah. I mean, it's not over yet.
Right. So I think, yes, there is.
Yeah.
There's hope that it could. How much hope? That's a debatable point.
Right.
But yes, neither side has slammed the door in each other's face
we're done
and walked away.
There's no
still hope.
opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this one, Lance, should we be trying to, as this article pointed out, should we be trying to seek to inflict harm on China to impede its continued ascent as a global superpower? Should we be trying to do that? This is tough. Because
Should we be trying to what now? Should we
be trying
Yes.
to inflict harm on China to impede its continued ascent as a global superpower? Your personal opinion. Because see, this is where I struggle.
I have to say yes. I mean, I've been saying for 20 years in the classroom that China was the country for the United States to worry about as far as if somebody were to take us over.
It'd be them.
Yes.
Most likely. I mean, somebody else could, but.
Right. But they were the up and coming power. They were the ones in the rear view mirror. You know, there were other cars behind them, but they were closing fast in the rear view mirror. And they have a system of government that's different than ours. But we have made inroads in that they do have pockets of capitalism that they're practicing.
Mm-hmm.
However, they don't have the freedoms that we thought they were going to get before the incident in Tiananmen Square, where we thought there was going to be this peaceful, nonviolent overthrow of the government, and they were going to become this democracy or some semblance of a democracy that we could be allies with and work with. That they still live in a very repressive government as far as individual rights go. However, economically, there are zones of capitalism that the Chinese have figured out makes them lots and lots of money and allows them to grow. But they're then turning and using that money to do things that we don't think a government should do as far as repressing its own people. So I guess we have to stand up them to some form or another. You obviously, where you're going with this is that if we overstep the bounds and we do too much and we upset them, they control enough of the world's economy that it could throw us into an economic tailspin. Mm-hmm. So I think we have to be very, very careful. That's my answer as we play. We're playing with fire.
Yeah. I think the reason
and as I've said, I'm scared of this president playing with fire.
I don't know if, despite everything, I don't know if China is, and I don't love the word dumb, because I don't think it does quite justice. If they would stoop to the level of responding by sending markets into a tailspin. And the reason I say that is because if we think back to the Cold War with Russia, the whole thing, right, that led to the end and thankfully didn't lead to some kind of nuclear apocalypse was mutually assured self-destruction. And I think we've got that here. A little bit more so China's relationship with us than our relationship with them, but not by much. You know, I mean, just a little bit. They're the world's second largest economy, but let's not fool ourselves. Why? It's because Americans buy what they have to sell.
That's true.
And the rest of the world. But that was in this book that Lance and I are reading, that was kind of the point that I'll leave you with is proportional to each person in this country, the wealth is so staggeringly higher than it is almost anywhere else. Doesn't mean everybody has that money to spend, but I'm saying the nation's average spending power is so high, and our being the first in the world in the economy, considering our population of 300 odd some million versus China's over 1 billion people, those are things to keep in mind of we've tapped into something here because they have so many more people and they're number two. And part of the way they do that is by utilizing the sheer number of force they have. But we don't do that. We have to take a different approach. So think about it at TrueChat.org. Listen to podcasts anywhere they're found for the State of Us on TrueChat in Urbana. I'm Justin T. Weller.
And I'm Lance Jackson.
Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time on The State of Us. Be the change.